Hi, this is Walter from Yellowstone Country Fly Fishing. This is my roughly weekly fly tying techniques video for February 16th, 2025. And here I'm just going to go over cleaning and stacking hair for hair wing flies, mostly dry flies, but sometimes you need to stack hair for streamers too. And I'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of hair and how some things get harder. And then the other thing I'm going to do is actually show you how to use one of these, which is an open hair packer. And I don't know if these were even made anymore. I got this, honestly, I kind of stole it from my landlord back when I lived in Gardner, and she was getting rid of all her fly tying stuff, and I just harvested this out of the box. Given that she didn't pay back my damage deposit, even though I cleaned for 25 hours and never made her fix anything, I think it was a fair trade. But anyhow, this style hair packer is very uncommon nowadays. I don't think there's any videos on YouTube on how to use it, and you can probably make your own. It's basically just it's like a shoehorn kind of, and for a wavier hair like calftail or bucktail, this is what you want. It really makes it a lot easier. Okay, so the first thing here, I'm just going to show you the basics. I've got just a patch of deer body hair. This is probably whitetail. I've got some mule deer around too. This could be mule deer. I'm bad about labeling things. What I do sometimes is actually label the hair on the back of the, just mark on the skin what it is. And because different kinds of hair work for different things. You see the sparkle down here. Hopefully that's not going to blow out the highlights too badly. This is very short and fine and has very abrupt taper to the tips, and that's what you want in a small dry fly hair like this. Whereas the deer body hair is kind of good for hoppers and kind of just general purpose use. But anyhow, my scissors are going to be very sharp. That's very important. And I like a tungsten carbide scissor for this with a little serration. You want to use a different pair of scissors for this purpose than you would use your normal, run-of-the-mill fly tying scissors, because the hair does tend to dull the scissors a little bit, and so they're going to get too dull for fine work eventually. Now, some people like this style, which is a razor scissor, which I don't honestly use these that much. Well, for one thing, this pair is a mess. I really need to have another pair in my kit that I haven't started using yet. But some people really like these because they can get really, really sharp. I tend to find the serrations are more helpful. And then for your kind of general use, especially, this is a standard 2-part hair packer made out of brass. You want something heavy. And you'll find these in like 3 or 4 sizes. And I find that I can do almost everything with the big one. You obviously can't stuff more hair into a small hair packer, but you can put a little hair into a big one like this. Okay, so, and then the other things I have here, which I didn't have in the video, are I have a little comb here, like this kind of brush tool that's more for dubbing. That'll work for really small patches of hair. And then I actually just have a straight up cheap, barber's comb. And you almost always want that fine side. That I don't think there's much use for these widely separated tines. Okay, so the basics here. Get your deer hair patch, and you see and deer hair is probably the easiest to work with because you can kind of see here these hairs are fairly fine, and they're very straight, and they also don't have a lot of fluff at the base. And all of those are factors that make it harder to work with. That's why I'm showing this first. But most of this transfers over. It just gets harder as you move to different kinds of hair. Okay, so I'm going to separate out a patch of hair here. And let's say this is a caddisfly wing. That's about enough for a caddisfly wing, like so. Tim Flagler says to use your scissor points. I always just use my fingers. And then, obviously I'd have this sitting on the just on the table if I was just doing it for real. I'm kind of holding it like this just for the video. But get your scissor tips in there and clip that off close to the hide there. And you also notice I haven't, hacked anything out of the middle of the patch. You want to work from one end to the other, work the direction the hair is laying. Set that aside, and then I'm going to get my hair here, and then how long you want your wing to be will govern where you hold this in the next step. So I'm holding it right now by the base like that. And if I want to tie, let's say, a hopper wing, that's kind of right at the maximum length of this fiber, I'm going to hold that way out on the tips here. because you do need to get rid of anything shorter than that to make a good looking dry fly wing. Now, if I was tying a caddisfly, I'd be more likely to hold it kind of down here because, you know, the fibers don't need to be as long in the first place. And obviously, you know, if you're tying a hopper wing with a hair that's almost too short like this, you'd need to cut off a bigger patch because you're going to wind up losing more of it. But what I'm going to do here is take my comb, and you can kind of probably see here, hopefully, this is that there's a lot of fluff mixed in with these the butts of this deer hair, and that will prevent the tips of that hair from stacking correctly. It'll kind of act like a glue almost. So you need to remove all that. And the way you do that, number one, you can come in here, hold it by the tips, and this works to get rid of kind of the more egregious ones. And you can just stroke it like that or grab it with your fingers. But you'll usually want to comb out the fluff. The fluff, that kind of gets rid of the hair, but that kind of soft fur, you really need to use a brush, or I mean, I'm sorry, a comb. So just like that, just like you're, you know, combing your kid's hair. And then once it's out, I tend to go back over it again with my fingers. Now that that's done, I'm going to slip that into my hair packer. And so you want the base and the top together like that. And you want to slide that in with the tips of the deer hair or elk hair pointing down like that. And then I like to give it a couple gentle taps. And then once I'm pretty sure everything's more or less settled, that's when I make the harder taps like this. Hopefully I didn't blow out the audio there. And then that should even up the tips like that. Then you hold it sideways, like so. I'm going to twist that. And this is, you usually see people just pull it directly out. I like to turn it like this. And that kind of, I think, kind of rolls the fibers and gets them to settle together. You just want to make sure it's level, because if you start tilting it, that'll change the length of those fibers. But I got it twisted here a couple times, and I'll gently pull straight out. And hopefully you can see there that those tips of that hair are now nice and even. So now I come in with my fingers and just pull them out lengthwise like that. And there you have a nice, you know, caddis wing or hopper wing. And now at this point what I'll do is actually look at that. I kind of like fan them out like that. And look to see if there's anything really egregious that just didn't stack. Or I see one in here. I don't know if this will show up. You see this fiber right there by my fingertip is actually blunt at the tip. And the fish probably don't care here because this is deer hair and it's fine. But I'm going to pull that out. Because if you're using something like elk hair, or especially elk mane or moose body, where the individual hairs are much thicker, if you have a blunt tip like that without a taper, it looks pretty bad. And again, the fish probably don't care, but you know, something that looks good, you're probably going to fish it better. Okay, so that's the basics of it. And that wing is ready to tie in, and you'll see me tie that in when I do my next fly tying video, because I use deer hair on my GFA hoppers. But I'll show you a couple other hairs here that are commonly used. So this is elk body hair, and I actually don't use elk body very much at all. You'll usually see this for wings on big stoneflies and big hoppers. I probably haven't touched this patch of hair in 5 years. I just don't use it much these days. But you can see how much coarser that hair is. And the reason this hair is kind of curved like this is it was sitting crumpled up in a drawer, because like I said, I don't use it very much. But otherwise it functions just like deer hair. It's pretty straight normally, and it doesn't have a whole lot of fluff at the base, and so again, that's pretty easy to work with. I just don't like it because deer hair packs down better because it's finer, and the elk hair, and despite what it's the name, you don't want to use, you know, a standard patch of elk hair like that to tie an elk hair caddis. It's too coarse. It's more for hoppers and stoneflies and things. This here is actually elk mane, and this is what I tend to use for stoneflies, some hoppers, but mostly big stoneflies. And you can see here, again, it's a pretty straight fiber. But you've got a lot of fluff, and I don't know how much this is going to show up, but you've got a lot of fluff at the base of that. And so that really needs a little bit more combing. And then it's also, the length of those hairs is also much more varied. There's a whole lot of short junk in there, and so again, it just takes a little bit more cleaning to process for those big flies. So it's a little harder to work with. This is moose body, and you see these are very coarse fibers. Typically, I'm only going to use this. You'll see it once in a while for things like midge bodies and things, like actually wrapped on the hook, but that's more commonly moose mane. But what I use this typically for is, again, those really big stoneflies, or it's also used sometimes for tails if you can just kind of use the tips. Pretty easy to work with because it's there's not a lot of fine stuff at the base there, and it's very straight, but it gets a little harder because it's so long. Sometimes I'll trim the hair shorter at the base end here, like where I'm holding my thumb. I'll clip it off at the hide, but then I'll clip it short, where my thumbnail is there, just to make it easier to fit that in the packer. And then something that's really useful for a lot of people here, this is early season cow elk, and you see this looks nothing like that elk I showed earlier. You see how much finer that is and shorter. This is actually a really good hair to use on elk hair caddis wings or X caddis, that kind of thing, because it's, again, functions just like the deer hair in terms of tying it in, but it's shorter and it has a kind of a longer gradual taper on those fibers that look good on caddis wings. And then you'll see some stuff marketed as different kinds of hair, like this is sparkle dun hair, and I don't know, I think this is probably that early season cow elk or possibly some kind of deer hair, and it's just a company marketing this as suitable for that, and that's usually pretty accurate. This would be what I would use for tying something like a pale morning dun, sparkle dun, and you can see again it's very short and fine and has very little fluff, and so that's fairly easy to work with. And basically the differences are number one, how fine it is, and because you want obviously a finer hair for a smaller fly, and shorter makes it a little easier to work that too. And then it's also based on the taper of the tips of the hair. Like on a sparkle dun, you want the hair to be hollow, way out towards the tips of the hair, because you have very little of the hair actually on the hook. And so if you don't have that hollow hair really out to the tips of the fibers, you don't have any flotation. But then this is kind of the final thing I'm going to show here. This is bucktail. And bucktail and calftail, a few other things like, goat hawk and things like that, which you aren't going to see very much, are going to be much harder to work with in general. And so I'm going to go in here, and generally speaking on a bucktail, your hair down here is going to be coarser, and that's going to flare more. So if you're tying something like a bulkhead, you'd want to use some stuff from down here. But if you're tying your clouser minnows, or actually this kind of stuff up in here, would actually be useful for the wings on golden stoneflies or hoppers. Some traditional stonefly patterns actually use bucktail for the wings. But if you're tying, I'm going to use white here because it's going to show up better. But so your clouser minnows and stuff like that, you're going to want to use more out towards the tips of the bucktail here. And I'm going to clip that off exactly the same way. Just cut it off close to the hide. And then, so I've got this bundle of bucktail. Now, this is much harder to work with. First off, if you're tying, a clouser or a streamer or something, you probably don't want to stack this. You just want to clean off, your fluff down here at the base. And bucktail usually does not have a lot of soft fluff, and so you can usually just use your fingers to do this part, right? You don't need to comb. But you can see how wildly different the lengths here are, and also how there's a lot of crinkle to the hair itself. That makes it much harder to stack. If you put this into the conventional hair stacker that I used already, that's going to be much harder to work with because it just doesn't want to stack as readily. Now, like I said, if I was tying a clouser or something, what you can actually do is you can come in here and maybe grab a few of these really long fibers. You actually take those out and then just kind of try to, not even them up completely, but just kind of set them in so that everything's a little bit closer together. And you can do it going the opposite direction too. You see how I've pulled off the short guys here. And I'm just kind of trying to roughly even those a little bit. And then certainly if I was tying a streamer, this is all I would do. Do that a few times, get it a little bit more situated, and then just tie it in like that. But if I was for some reason tying a dry fly right now, where I do want those tips more even like I did with the first stacking that I did, that's when my open hair stacker comes in. And the big advantage here, so it's a little harder to work with because what I'm doing there is I'm just kind of setting that in that shoehorn kind of arrangement there. And obviously I can't take this vertical, because if I take it vertical, it's going to just all fall out. And I also can't tap it hard, because if I tap it hard, it's going to fall out. But what I can do is just kind of gently do that. And then the key advantage with this kind of hair stacker is I can come in like this. It's much easier done when I'm not lurking behind a camera here. And you got see how I'm kind of spreading that out like that. I can actually spread it out with my fingers and manipulate it a little bit with my fingers to just make that process a little bit easier. And I'm going to do that several times, just literally spreading it out through that hair stacker. I may have called it a hair packer, but it's a stacker. The packer is totally different. But you see how I'm just kind of gently tapping that. And in reality, it wouldn't be this hard, because I would be, sitting at the table. I wouldn't be standing behind this camera at arm's length from it. But I'm doing that. And then you see by comparison, I mean, it's not going to be perfect. Deer hair and calf tail are not going to be ever as easy to tie as body hair. But you see how that's much more even than it was. And I can repeat that process too. I still see some down here that are not right. But I would actually, in reality, probably do that a little bit more, several more times in my fingers before I even put it in that packer. And then while I was sitting at the table, I would be kind of constantly manipulating these fibers. I see one that's a little too long, I'd be moving it down. If I see one that's too short, I'd be moving it, to rest so the tip is closer. Like here, you can kind of see how this one just kind of came out. I'm just going to I literally set that where I want it. Or maybe I'll remove it because it's so curved here. But this open packer like this, or open stacker like this, really allows for much closer control of these kind of coarser and particularly more wavy fibers. So if you really do need a good stacked wing, I recommend trying to find one of these. I'm going to pull off a couple of those that wound up being too long. But you see how that's actually a pretty put together sort of wing, where it's close to the same length, even though it's so wavy. Like I said, I've never seen anybody use one of those open packers on YouTube before. But anyway, there you have it. There's kind of a pretty thorough guide on cleaning and stacking hair. And you'll see me tie some with it coming up in a few days. As always, thanks for watching. And if you find this video helpful, do me a favor and click the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pattern description and throw me a buck or two. If you're looking for guided trips in the Yellowstone region, my contact info is on the video.